thus it begins.
Yeah.
I mean, when you listen to it now, when you re-listen to it now, do you still find like new things in it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those tracks where every time I listen to it, it sort of gets me into a flow, but then you can hear different things. Did you hear different things?
I don't know. That's why I was curious how you were hearing it, how you were listening to it.
I think at this point I'm a bit numb already, and I recall back to the time where I remember I told you that like, oh, this is the best work that I've done.
That definitely crossed my mind. A lot of things were crossing my mind as I was re-listening to that. I mean, how do you feel about that statement today? So I think one thing to note is that this track was essentially written and composed in 2019, and it's pretty much the only track on the album that has remained intact, right?
Actually, that is true. Yeah.
It's 100% accurate.
Yeah, the composition has not been touched since 2019, and it's the only like artifact that stood the test of time.
Yeah. So how do you feel about it? You said so in 2019. You were like, "This is the best thing that I've ever made." Do you still stand by that?
I think it's a good thing that I've made. I feel good about it. Definitely not the best.
Okay, that's probably healthy.
Yeah. It's I think what I was trying to say when I said like this was the best, it was that like I was really, really fond, and I'm still really, really fond of this track. Yeah, and how it came about.
How did it come about?
Yeah.
That's another thing I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you about the vivid conditions under which it was composed.
I don't even remember, like, I know this came after we wrote 4 songs together, like including the one for later.
Yeah.
And then the 3 songs that which we wrote after that. And I remember like we having talked about like, oh, we might need an instrumental intro for it to like proceed. And I remember like this was the impetus to compose a track that played that function as sort of an introduction to this world. And now I remember the first working title of Late Bloomer. One of the very early first titles was Who?
Yes.
With a question mark.
Yes. WHO.
I think that struck me as a point of like, okay, I should write this to introduce the world that these characters are in. And I was thinking of questions like, what is this landscape? What is this world? And I sort of wanted to search for something that wasn't so direct in terms of a narrative, in terms of like, oh, these 2 people are on a spaceship and they've crash landed at this like unknown planet that's undiscovered. And I think that's too direct and too specific. And so with the power and with the assistance of music, I think in music, like you don't really have to say, and you can leave a lot for the listener's imagination and their own perception of the sounds. And so that was what I wanted to do with this track. And for me, the feeling that it created was what I held on to and what I was really, really fond about. Yeah.
In my humble opinion, I would say that you were successful, right, in building a sense of introduction of landscape. I think what it conjures up in the mind is really expanse. Yeah, maybe an unnameable terrain.
I remember one of the comments from our good friends, there were too many organic sounds. There were too many nature sounds, like too much water and fire.
Yeah, I guess it can sound conflicting, right? That
Yeah,
was something I
yeah.
picked up on again this time.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, do you feel like that's something you've had to negotiate for yourself, or you're just like, that's just me, man?
Not at all. I think this is something that I definitely stood by, and hence it's one of the tracks that has not even gone through like any changes apart from like mixing. And yeah, so it's, I mean, I feel that it's a part of how I imagine the sound world for this, and I hate to use the word soundscape because for me it's more than that. It's the introduction to a larger story, a larger journey that we're trying to tell on the album.
Yeah, I remember some of the unanimous comments were cinematic. So I think it's not just me. I think at least with the few people that we've previewed this to, your work, even in its sonic nature, has a very visual element to it. I mean, that's how I write to your instrumentals as well. Close my eyes and try to evoke or to concentrate on what it pictorially it evokes within me. I mean, with this, with Ghost, I imagine this. It's orange, it's vast. There's like a monorail, that's just coursing through. And the orange maybe could be it's not necessarily like a desert hue, but it could be from the sun. It's just these images.
I really like the image of like monorail that you brought up, like, because for me Ghost is so an interesting fact is the earlier title to Ghost is M. Yeah.
Which we should at some point get into about all the original titles.
Yeah. But I really like the idea of a monorail because I think for Ghost, musically, that was sort of the intention to just travel through this unending, unyielding landscape that didn't end, didn't stop. And you're just going through it. You're just like hurtling through it. And I hate to associate any particular emotion or like to it, because for me that is what you feel when you listen to the track, and I want to try not to inject that in.
I think that's the potential downside to talking about your work, right?
Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting for people to hear. I'm really interested in what the reception is going to be. I mean, we've heard it like, 20, 50 times.
Yeah.
I wonder whether people will feel like this is a progression of Mervin Wong's oeuvre, or whether they'll be able to sense that it predates.
It's a time travel. It's actually a time travel. But actually, that's very true. That's very interesting because, I mean, we wrote most of the tracks, the music, in 2019, and
mine, the stuff I rewrote. I feel like actually the bulk of the writing on the album as it exists today, for me, happened 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Like there was a major like shift, I think, of maturity to your writing during that period. Yeah. But I would say it's interesting because the main composition and including your former like lyrics and writing like were done in 2019 when we were both each very different people. So it's interesting to see how that sits in the timeline, and it's strange because Late Bloomer actually informed a lot of my later compositional styles rather than like leading up to something like Late Bloomer.
Yeah. Yeah. So could you give an example of how what were some things that led to future songwriting and composition?
Okay, definitely with Late Bloomer and I remember how we started is that when we were working on those 3 songs together, which is now called Gap, Play-Doh, and the end credit song for your film Later. The idea was just to have fun, and I remember taking like those metal bowls behind you, the recorder, and making like random sounds with it. I remember clearly like we were here in the studio and I was just like remarking to you like, oh, we can just make a track with like these metal bowls like and that became Play-Doh.
Yes.
And then I remember clearly also like I was like, oh yeah, even the recorder can do something. And then like I started blowing the recorder and that became the intro to Play-Doh. Yeah.
That Usia influence.
Yeah. I didn't intend it to be an Usia reference or a kind of like Eastern sort of like symbolism. It was kind of like let me play the recorder and let me see like what kind of sounds can the recorder make and what will happen if we do this to the sound of the recorder. And then it became symbolic to that nature. Yeah, which is interesting. Because we were just having fun, or I was just having fun, and then this sort of spirit like reminded me like again like why I'm doing music and why I'm writing this.
But I after having known you and worked with you for so many years, right, Mervin, I still get the feeling that your work itself, your work on your music itself is never labored. I feel
I remember talking to you about this.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually the easiest, most effortless, most brainless part for you. It's the most instinctive.
But it's the part that I love the most. So it's not necessarily work for me. It's just another 1,000 ways to make a light bulb.
Yeah.
And for me, you learn from like, oh, this doesn't work, but then this creates that. And oh, this way doesn't work, but then it informs this. And then I can use it. And these 2 mistakes I can put together and it makes this. And then, so for me, it's a never ending playground. And that's why it's not laborious for me when it comes to like music, writing, composing, sound designing, and airplane.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we were gonna... I do feel with music making, with production, there's ample opportunity to embrace accident.
And I feel it's like a canvas where you're painting and you never know what's going to happen, or your paint is the most interesting thing. Your palette is what is the most interesting thing. And that's why I don't want to restrict my palette to like, oh, these instruments, these synthesizers, these machines, or it could be anything.
Do you feel like you've left the field recordings behind? Is that something that you continue to use in your work?
The nature of how and why I got into using field recordings, and I am still exploring these techniques today. And for me, it's always, like I said, it's always about the palette of sounds and letting your palette be as open as it can be, and doesn't have to be a particular object or instrument or recording. It can be anything. And for me, I'm always trying to find that constantly within the process. So it's not so much about deciding whether to use field recordings or not. For me, all sounds are field recordings, including sounds in the studio and including artificial sounds. They are field recordings to me as well. It's how you treat them, how you like employ them in the use of the composition. Yeah.
What are some of like the more interesting or unexpected sounds you've stumbled upon recently? Or even in Ghost? Like what are some sounds you might want to call out?
So truth be told, Ghost is actually production wise extremely simple, because it's actually made up of two sort of like a melody and a sort of like a counter melody, and both are sort of like pad like textures that are very string heavy, although it's not exactly a live like string kind of thing, but it's made up of different like string instruments and string like synthesizers, and it's these like two melodies that just circle back round and round throughout the track. And for me, this is the monorail. This is what sticks.
How do you feel about the title Ghost?
This is something that I never asked you before, like why Ghost? And I really like it.
I like it too.
Yeah.
The art of titling tracks is a rather difficult one to master.
It's a unique poetry.
Yeah.
Because of like how, yes, you're titling an essence of the song, but you're trying to bottle an essence of a song, but also like when it comes out on the album in a certain order, it sort of has a certain flow to it. So it's a weird poetry.
Yes. And also, not to get too dramatic about it, but I feel like a title can also make or break a track, or if not, at least significantly influence like the experience of it, right? The reception.
Yeah, of course. That's the very first immediate experience the listener has with your work. It's the title. It's not even the sound, not even like the track or the song. It's the title.
Yeah, and it's something that can't really be scienced, you know?
There's no formula.
Yeah, it's very much a feeling.
So how do you end up with Ghost?
I'll be honest, I can't quite recall how Ghost happened. I know we were struggling with the title because, as you mentioned, the placeholder was M. And that was a legacy from the first round of the album when the titles all happened to be names. So,
that's so interesting. Yeah,
did you forget that?
No, I remember that, but just recalling that, like, that's extremely interesting actually.
Because the tracks that we wrote were Penelope, Plato. Plato's the only one that stayed. It's the only one that survived.
Yeah. In terms of the titles.
Yes, in terms of the titles. What were the other? It was like
Phoebe. Jade.
Phoebe. Yes, Jade, which you just pulled out recently.
Yeah, into like a random Telegram channel that I created.
Yeah, so I know that we were struggling.
Marco.
Yes, Marco, which became Retriever.
Yeah.
And I mean, all these, I guess that gives you a sense of why we might have wanted to name the album Who, right?
Exactly. I've never thought about that.
Because it was all tied to identity.
Yeah, people.
And clearly about finding oneself.
Characters. Yeah.
And these names, they were not orchestrated or they were not preconceived. They all just happened to be names that I had incepted into the lyrics of each track. And And I
Which you
guess,
still can get some of those, which some of those still are in the current version of the track.
I think most have been scrubbed though. I think even Plato, the name
Oh,
itself
yeah,
was
yeah,
taken
you're right,
out,
you're
but I
right,
did
yeah,
like
yeah.
the questioning aspect
Yeah.
of that name.
Yeah.
But back to Ghost.
Yeah, so it's difficult for me because like Plato is Plato for me, and like
Yes.
Penelope is Gap for me.
Yes.
Marco is Retriever, and Phoebe is like Lion. So it's funny because for the listener, they might interface with it like with its current title, but I interface, and you were just bringing up the fact that like names have such a power to songs and tracks, right? So I interface with these songs through different names, and like it's kind of like a hidden spell to unlock. Like they say, like if you know the name of like a demon, like you have complete power over this entity and things. So names have, the idea is that names have a lot of power to them. And yeah, it's strange.
So are you saying that it's like knowing a person before?
Yeah, so
they've undergone some kind of transformation.
So I think like these are the tracks are like our friends also who have like undergone these transformation over like the past 3 years.
Yeah. Yes, I will say Gap. It took a while to adjust to Gap because we kept being like Penelope,
Yeah, exactly.
And then we were so fond of Penelope, and we were like, must we? But it would be weird. We acknowledged
It'd be weird to have
that
names.
it would be just weird.
I think that was definitely more you, and I was definitely fine with like
Penelope.
Yeah, what must we change?
Put my foot down.
Yeah.
Put my foot down. Yeah, because I believe in the sanctity of, and also for someone who has like zero contextual knowledge to be like, and then they come across Gap and they're like, why is this called Penelope? I forget how Ghost materialized, but I did like what it could represent, which was this. It has this phantom, gossamer, insubstantial quality, right? And maybe it could be about leaving something behind. Maybe it could be about finding something to have vanished or disappeared.
It's funny because I never was able to put that into words, but yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with like what I was trying to write with the composition of the track, and that is a very apt description of like the intention of the music.
Which is I mean you're tunneling somewhere.
Yeah.
So you're leaving somewhere behind to get to somewhere else. But also I know for myself the process of writing those tracks was a process of lost and found, and trying to figure out where one idea went. Yeah, because it was always one of those, it was like one of the settled tracks.
Yes. Yeah. The anchors.
The anchor.
Yeah.
And I mean, what a feeling, right? To be able to return to something and be able to sit back in contentment, knowing, no, that's done. I don't need to fiddle with anything.
I think that was one of the first times where I started to practice this sort of mentality. Like once I'm done with something, I'm done with something. Like it's not that it cannot be better, but I appreciate it in its current form, and that's the form that it materializes, and that's it.
Our experiences of reworking the album and each improving on our respective crafts took different shapes. Mine was rewriting. Do you want to talk about what you bolstered yourself up in?
I think it's for you. It's not just rewriting, but it's like discovering so much more within the rewriting. I think for me, it's finding that even deeper connection to what I'm feeling in that current moment and how best to convey it through the composition. Be it through better mixing choices, better sound design, better writing techniques. Those are all technicalities to me, and they all don't matter. Like in the end, it's, are you able to express a certain feeling or invoke a certain feeling within your listener? I'm always trying to bridge that gap, like closer and closer and closer.
Yeah, I suppose it is underplayed how integral mixing is to a track, to the production of a track. And that's something I know firsthand that you were working on.
There is the creative aspect to it, and then there's the more technical aspect to it. And then of course you hand it off to a mixing engineer before it gets handed off to a mastering engineer. And I think in this case for Late Bloomer, it's a little bit more unique, where we worked with Kin Leon, who was both our mix engineer and our mastering engineer. And in particular, the decision to sort of work with Kin Leon was to have someone that could have more of a creative hand in a process that's highly technical. But I think we both felt like it was really important to have someone who really understood the music and the intentions of the recordings, the performances, and how best to treat them in a way. And I always liken the process of what Kin Leon was able to achieve with the mixing and mastering for Late Bloomer as composing music, and you hand off a score to musicians and a conductor, and the conductor is the one that will sort of interpret your score. So at that point of time, your music is already composed, it's done, but within the performance of it, there is some sort of like reinterpretation that I think Kin Leon was like very successfully able to achieve. So it was still our songs, but in a way like polished up differently, and it's kind of like when you hand off like a old piece of art to a gallery or a museum, and they sort of like reframe it, they restore it.
Or how about this? Script writer who hands off their script to an actor. Would you say that that's
even
similar?
like if you write a novel and you hand it off to your editor, and yeah, so I mean the editor does not make can give you creative suggestions, but does not like have a heavy hand in it. Might be more technical, it might be more dramaturgical, but it's that kind of relationship that I really appreciated with what Kin Leon was able to do and work together with us in terms of like producing the final product of Late Bloomer. And I think that was a really, really crucial aspect of it as well.
What's something else that you feel you want to address about Ghost?
I mean, for me, it's the most straightforward track in Late Bloomer, and it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yes.